So I'm Charlie Conrad. I'm a former Oregon State representative, and I lost my primary, a Republican primary, connected with Chanel because I wasn't done with good government type issues, and I'm still actively involved in that. And so she and I connected through mutual connection because she lost her Idaho primary, and so she and I had mutual interests. And so we formed a nonprofit. It's called Common Ground United We Stand. And that's the organization that we're doing these salons for. And one of the things that we have done is we do, basically about every other month newsletters. And one of the things that we've written about and that we came up with, and I'll bring it up just so I can make sure I get it all right. Our website is commonground-uws.org if you're interested, and I can put that in the chat. But one of the things that we came up with as we go through and we talk about good government issues and what we're interested in, we want civil discourse. So we are nonpartisan, we're policy agnostic, right? So we don't care what party people vote for. We don't get out and advocate for any policy position specifically. We want people to be able to be engaged, and we want people to be able to choose who's going to best represent them with whatever the issues are, wherever way you go. And so we want to be able to bring our experience of working in the legislatures to people and to answer questions, to talk to folks, to hopefully get out and energize some civic engagement, and to pass on our experience so that as you go to the ballots, maybe you're a little bit more informed voter. Maybe you make some different decisions. Maybe you kind of prioritize some things a little bit different with how you select your candidates if you have a choice. I mean, in Oregon, we have closed primaries. So there are a lot of folks that don't necessarily have a choice because the primaries are going to dictate who's going to win the general. So that's something. So in some other endeavors that we're working on some systems reform as well. Again, we want people to be able to choose who's going to represent you the best. And that's what we advocate and we support. And so in that vein, one of the things that we did, and this is in our May newsletter, but we came up with basically a framework. We call them questions. We can also make them as statements. And that's one of the things after these salons that we hope to turn them into statements and to build upon some of this work. So this is our fourth salon. The first salon that we had covered the four questions, and I'll just cover them real quick. Is do all humans have the same right when they're born? And we kind of modified that, and you can make that into a statement that we all have equal rights when we're born. There's no difference between any of us and the rights that we have. Mm-hmm. The other part that we look at, and these kind of build on each other. So the first one's just the basic ground. We all have the equal rights. We're all, there's no difference between us. And to get to the good government side of things, we look at us as humans and human nature, and we can't discount that as we start talking about governance. And so there are 5 traits that we think are central to impacting the way that governments are structured and what their purpose is, which is what hopefully we'll be having a great conversation today about. But the first one is that we're passionate first, we're reasoning second. And if you're again behavioral economics person, it's system 1 versus system 2. And it's the emotions versus the logic and the reasoning side of who we are as people. And these are common to all of us. The second one is, that we are hierarchical as humans. And third, we're social. Fourth, we're self-motivated, self-interested, right? We always pursue our self-interest. And then the fifth one is that we're fallible. And, as I look through and continue to read the headlines and select articles daily, I see components of all of these out there in the public sphere in terms of the decisions that are being made, the way that people are reacting. So, it's that we're passionate, we're hierarchical, we're social, we act in our self-interest, and that we're fallible. And then, those make up some other different things such as, identity theory and who we align with, and some of those other kind of things about how we attach and we assign identities to ourselves. But I think those, getting back to first principles, I think those all compose the first principles of who we are and the main characteristics for it. Things that our government structure with whatever we end up with needs to account for. And I always term it as, how do we protect us from us? How do we revamp our government when we're done with where we're at, and we have some opportunities to make some decisions? How do we protect us from us, given all these basic human nature characteristics that we have? So we spent a couple of salons talking about that, and that gets us to the third question that we've got, which is today's. is what is the essential purpose of government? And so again, we're talking about equal rights. We're talking about who we are as humans, the things that are make that ubiquitous through all of us. Then what is the essential purpose of government? And then the final question brings it all together is what do we want our government to do? So all these things build on each other, and then our next salon, maybe our final salon, we'll see how it goes. Will be what do we want our actual government to do, given all these other things that are going on with that. And so that's what we've put together, and those are the conversations that we're having. And that's you know these conversations we hope are going to build a foundation for us to be able to get out. We want to do some surveys. We want to be able to get to conferences. There are a lot of other things we want to do to get out there and have these conversations. The way that I look at it is that if we have these conversations, then it brings it to the forefront of our brains. And again, as we do that, as we have those conversations in public, again, we might be able to impact some people's voting, maybe give them some different things to consider as they go to the ballot. So any questions on any of that about how we got to today?
Thanks for that summary, Charlie. It's certainly an interesting time to be having this conversation. It's a tumultuous time. And I wonder if we are trying to have this conversation buffered from the current reality of our daily political ups and downs, separate from that or in reference to that.
I think a lot of what we talk about, it is in direct reference to where we're at today, right? I mean, so this is really, the daily headlines and the stories out there, I think really for me concentrate the need to have these conversations. But as, I go through, always the student, never the master of political history, political philosophy, and all those types of things. These are embedded with Rousseau. These are embedded with Hobbes. These are embedded with folks from hundreds of years ago that are much smarter than I ever will be about, human nature and about the relationship between humans and government and what that structure looks like. And so, we're just in that concentrated period. I just started reading the Fourth Turning is Here. So if anybody's read that and completed it, but it's where we're at is for that theory, it's cyclic, and that we have been in these crisis eras before, and they follow every 80 to 100 years. And so it's interesting as you go back through history and start looking at some of these crisis periods, but there's always a post-crisis period. And that's one of the things that as we do our work today, as we have conversations today, how do we prepare for that post-crisis period? What do we want that to look like? And how do we get there now, knowing that we have to go through history now, right? We've got to live this history before we can get to that point in time.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are a handful of us here. So if you have something, chime in like that, raise a hand, whatever it is. But, as we go through, we call it a facilitated conversation, but really I want it to be a conversation. So chime in, raise your hand if you have thoughts, questions, whatever, because that's what this is. I'm not a professor here to give a lecture in front of everybody. I want to have good conversations and be able to share different viewpoints. So with that, there are only a handful here. So do people just want to go through real quick, say who they are and say where they're at, because we've got a diversity from around the country that I can recognize here. So I'll just go the way people are on the screen. So again, I'm Charlie from Oregon, and Rick.
You're muted,
you're on mute,
Nick. Rick, you're muted.
Didn't know I'd turned that off. Excuse me. I'm Rick Cheatham. I'm serving my second term in the Idaho legislature in the House of Representatives. I also am ending my second term in the Pocatello City Council. My term will be up at the end of this year, and I've decided not to run again. So I'm a firm believer in a group called Braver Angels, and I expect to get something similar to that out of this group. So thank you.
Yeah, I love Braver Angels. Robert?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rob Dodson. I'm a resident of Cottage Grove, Oregon, which is about 30 miles south of Eugene, because we're considered rural. I was instrumental in getting a group started here earlier this year called the Cottage Grove Friends of Democracy. I invited Charlie in to speak with us a couple months ago. We have a shared interest, I think, in building a bigger tent and identifying common ground. We're a group of 100 on our mailing list and 25 regularly who show up every week. And that's a pretty small percentage in terms of our 11,000 population. So there've got to be more people here in this town who really want to live under a democracy rather than an autocracy. So we're trying to find the common ground that will attract them.
Thank you. Chanel, you want to touch base real quick again?
Sure. So I'm Chanel Dixon. I, as Charlie mentioned, used to be a legislator in the Idaho legislature. I served with Rick. I lost my primary to just wild circumstances and a crazy person who enjoyed lying about me and was able to win because of that. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation in particular. And Robert, one of the things that I'm doing in Twin Falls, so I live in Twin Falls, Idaho, I'm hosting a barbecue in a couple of weeks, and I called it Grilling Up Hope for Idaho. And I have a Republican legislator friend and a Democrat legislator friend, both very dear friends of mine, and we worked very well together in the Idaho legislature, and it can be done. Anyway, I asked both of them to come, and we are I've invited people from all over my community, and so far we're getting pretty good RSVPs, but we're just talking about, I mean, mostly it is just a neighborhood barbecue, but I asked the two of them to come and talk about civil discourse and just the importance of having conversations in our community, because I feel like there's so much of this wall that people are building around them. And so it's exciting to hear other people, doing similar things. Yeah, I just think conversations are really important, and we have to be able to have conversations with people that maybe don't think exactly like us. And I actually think that that's one of the greatest experiences in my life, is when I get to talk to people that don't think just like me. So anyway, excited to be here, and also excited to meet people from around the country that have similar hopes for us. So
Thanks, Chanel. Victoria?
Hello, I am dialing in from the Twin City area of Minnesota, and I have had a career in real estate, so I'm interested a lot in municipality issues, level issues, but I am more interested in the philosophical side of how things work, of the engagement of different aspects of human nature in responding to their needs, to group needs, and also to, the independent actor. Navigating for the self as well. So I am coming at it from that sort of side.
Excellent. Thank you. Leslie?
And I'm Leslie Mogill, and I'm here from Oregon, thanks to the Nonprofit Association. That's how I heard about the opportunity. In terms of my career, it's been largely in the nonprofit sector. That's the connection to the nonprofit organization. And the last 11 years, for the first time on the other side of that coin, which is the public sector. So working in county government under the umbrella of public health. And I am in the midst of a personal and professional transition in terms of where I want to direct my talents and energies. As a wildly optimistic, I'm the person who finds the nugget in the pile of negativity, and I carry those around to get me through the day, as Robert was stating, and I want to use that energy in a way that is engaging others at a higher level. I think the one thing we know for certain is the trend line of engagement, and when you look in this room, in this virtual room, in this small group, and you look at age characteristics and race characteristics and all the rest of it, we need to have young people more engaged and involved we need diversity in these conversations, and I'm really interested in that part. Like, a democracy can only survive when all of its citizens, or the majority of its citizens, are actively engaged. And Oregon makes it really easy for voter turnout, and we have pretty good numbers. So, I'm proud of that. In other places, maybe not so. My original, where I was born and raised, was Florida. I consider myself a political refugee from there. Um, when people stopped talking to each other and were started waving fingers and having only one world view, it's hard to live in an environment like that. So I'm fully invested in conversations that don't allow that kind of slant in either direction to happen.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Trey?
Yeah, I'm from Alabama, and just in general interested in anything that goal is to foster political conversation, um, as that is, as we've all noticed, been lost in the past few years. So that's why I'm here.
Great. Thank you for being here. DJ?
Pretty much exactly what Trey said, except Arkansas.
Sherry?
Hi, I'm in Twin Falls, Idaho, and I currently sit on city council, and I'm exploring other options in possibly in other areas of elected, going higher up in government. But I'm here to just soak all this in.
Thank you for being here. And David, you want to come off mute, or are you going to listen?
Yeah, I'm David Ballard. I'm a retired economist and a borough councilor in my local borough here of Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. I'm in a blue swing district in a red or blue swing state. So, it's always interesting around here. I've been on a few of these before. I was on a salon last night with Trey, and I've been on salons before with DJ. So the wonder of inner intellect is always present. Look forward to. I'm in a Starbucks. I've got something to do at 7 o'clock, so I might limit my participation, but I do want to listen in and maybe chat.
That works. Thank you for being back here. I appreciate it. So one of the things I just put in, one of the quotes that I think really sets up and seeds this conversation. This is from Rousseau's opening line to the social contract. And I put it in the chat. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. And again, that gets back to the opening about the questions that Chanel and I came up with, is that we're all born with equal rights, but asserting those rights, I go to the Hobbesian side of things, but asserting those rights means that we're going to have to somehow intrude and or compete and or have to negotiate, compromise with somebody else because they're going to be able to assert their own rights as well. And so one of the things that I want to open up this conversation with, just curious on, is the basic statement of what is the purpose of government? How do you see it? And I can go ahead and say what I think it is, but before I do that, I would love to hear from you, from everybody, whoever wants to chime in. What do you see as the basic purpose for government?
Did you say the basic purpose of government?
Yes. All right. I will. Let me seed it with what I've got, and this is the way that I see it. So counter it, agree with it, whatever you feel. But to me, the way that I see it is the basic purpose of government is to manage interactions between people and to protect their shared, equal, natural rights from tyranny, with tyranny being defined as a deprivation of rights. And I'll put that in the chat so you can read it. Maybe I'll put it in the chat. Here we go. So to me, that's what I see as the basic purpose of government. It's managing the interactions between people to protect our shared equal rights from tyranny. That is from tyranny of the majority, but also tyranny of the minority. Because those in power, whether the minority or majority, they're going to try to assert that power and they're going to go grow that power. We can just look at human nature, look at Musk. He can't get enough money, right? 300 billion plus dollars. Now he wants 400 billion. He's going to be, he wants to be the first trillionaire in history. And people want power. They don't stop. It's that ambition that they have. So any thoughts, any disagreements, any rewording?
I'm wondering if it's worth distinguishing right at the outset that people can self-manage without government. And so there's two levels at which we organize and manage for maximum freedom and still sharing for these equal rights. We do it formally and informally. And so we don't always need government to get along. But at some point, maybe due to the size of the population, you need to make it formal so that people that you don't know across town, everybody knows the rules. So that's just a thought.
You're right. One of the basic unit of people together is the family. And usually in families, you go back through time, there's going to be some sort of hierarchy with how that family is run, depending on point in time. But then as you expand that out and go up to, groups and tribes and everything else from there, at some point in time, those other folks, as you mentioned, that may be a couple huts down the road, maybe a couple miles down the road, next farmstead down the road, there has to be some sort of common understanding about that rights. And there needs to be, to use Malcolm Gladwell's point, there's got to be a tipping point. When are the informal interactions and our handshake agreements worth and can be sustained and are appropriate enough versus when do we need to have a third party, which is the way I see the government, enforce that if either you or I transgress or perceive to transgress on somebody else's rights. Did I encapsulate kind of what you were thinking, Victoria, or did I go the other way?
No, you did it absolutely right. And the family is, the one that everybody falls to. But I do want to put a plug in for associational life because I think associational life is a vast, underestimated, and underaccounted for activity that isn't governmental. So just that would be the only thing I'd add.
What I haven't heard the term associated life. What can you define what that is a little bit?
Associational life would be anything like from the Rotary, from PTA, from church organizations, from just, all the millions of volunteers that devote their time and efforts to organize for a group project, for a group endeavor that are not regulated by any formal structure or taxed, paid through taxation.
And so that gets, to me, that touches on a couple things. The first thing is that if those are going to be registered organizations, right, if they're going to be formal nonprofits, then the government's going to be involved in that. And so there is going to be an overlying umbrella and a structure that they're going to have to comport to with taxes, with tax exemptions, with whatever they end up doing with their reporting, their accounting requirements. So there's going to be some sort of government involvement with that. But the other part that I see, and it's one of the other questions that I have put out to the group, the moral side of things, the cultural, social, and moral side of things. What is the purpose and role of government to regulate that and to allow that, right? So we've got our First Amendment where, the freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom to practice your own religion and not have a religion forced on you. All of that, can be encompassed that you can talk about your religion and you can associate with other people in your religion and can't be barred from that. And to me, that's that umbrella and that's, I like that umbrella and I like that level of interest and support from the government to be able to protect those rights and those moral rights. DJ, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a a lot of what the government does is real. There's basic rights protection, and I think for most people that means just the police, right? They come and stop a crime or investigate a crime. But I think a lot of what the government does most of the time is just arbitrate conflicts around property. You know, who owns it? First, you know, it serves as the record of who actually owns a property. And then, you know, is someone's property being infringed in some way, or are they infringing on someone else's property because they want to build a, you know, um, a tire burning plant next to a nice home, you know, and then, you know, to the Elon Musk point, I mean, that's basically the world's biggest property owner in a sense, you know, and it both gives him power, but it also gives him rights. You know, he's protected from someone coming and just taking all of his money. And there's lots of rights that flow from that that you know, are important. That if they weren't there, then the economy would stall. You know, it would turn into just a war of everyone against everyone else.
Leslie?
Yeah, I just think there's one term in your definition that you threw out in the beginning that I think is so open to interpretation, and that's the quote unquote word tyranny. Um, so you know, again, going back to some of the things you pointed out about individuals, and how they define what tyranny is through their own probably self-serving lens, to some degree. So it makes me hard to grasp that because it is so malleable to the individual and or group, but certainly to the individual. I mean, there are, you know, on the libertarian side, any taxation is tyranny, right? In terms of what government might provide the navigation for. Because I've been on the health and human services side of government, I see it in another side of it than the property side that was just mentioned, and that is the service delivery side. Um, so to me, equitable access and opportunity to the services that government helps navigate, whether it's through partnerships with the associative community like Victoria talked about, you know, some of those nonprofits or faith-based organizations, or call it a community. But the evaluation of how well is that occurring? How well and how fair is access and opportunity to necessary services, whatever they are, even if it's to pay your tax bill, and maybe you speak a foreign language, and to understand all that property stuff within that realm. So yeah, very complicated society we live in. So to me, equitable access and opportunity to one, have a voice, to access services, and to work in partnership with government to help guide it in that navigation of conversation is, I think, a really important thing if you want people to be engaged.
Appreciate that. A couple questions come to mind. One of the things that comes up, it is how proactive, particularly as we talk about the service side. So I've done a lot of nonprofits, I've done health and human services, I've done a lot in that services side of things in local government. What is the role? What do you guys see as the role of being proactive? Right? It is, you know, is it to push somebody to use coercive powers of the state, or is it just not to deny? Because there are two things, right? You can push people towards something, or you can just not deny them the ability to access something. And for me, that comes down to government responsibility versus personal accountability, and trying to identify and define what is that line between those two things. Okay, not seeing not seeing any hands. Go ahead, Rob. You're on mute.
Thanks. Well, just for the sake of getting some reactions, I'll volunteer to read the definition of the fundamental purpose of government that I got from a Google AI search. Happens to agree with my own, but I'll read it. It's short. In a democracy, the basic purpose of government is to protect individual rights and promote the common good by serving the will of the people. Based on a social contract with the people, the government's authority is legitimate only as long as it fulfills this purpose. Any reactions?
Yes, I agree. That's a lot of what I agree with. And I just put in something similar to that of the way that I articulated. I think pretty much most of the points that you made in that, in terms of a democracy and the basic purpose of the government, and the elements, and these are in our Constitution as well. It's it's we the people, it's consent of the governed, and it's protection of rights. And so again, that fundamental responsibility. What are the obligations that we have, and what are the obligations for the state, or the ability for the state to use coercive powers to enforce those obligations? I mean, the easy one is obviously paying your taxes. There are coercive ways to do that. The other one is serving in the military. Fortunately, we haven't had a draft for a while, but that is also one of the state's coercive powers. Same thing with power of arrest and everything in the criminal justice system, the warranting of those processes. So I think, yeah, it is trying to find that balance of when the state is authorized to use coercive powers. Victoria, go ahead.
So just building a little bit more on what Leslie said, if government is there to protect people and shore them up in times of need, I think it's difficult, and there's no clear measurement system for evaluating that need. Do people, in fact, have a need to get to the polls? Is something inhibiting them? Do they need all the different services? And it's the system seems to be that people go to their elected officials and petition them, and then those people champion. But I don't know if that's the most effective. It just seems like that ends up being the loudest people, the most aggressive people get heard, versus a true finding, the frail and in need, and actually providing the support services to them. So I think that's out for more conversation, if there's a better way to look for how we supply those services.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the next salon, the next topic that we're having is that fourth question of what do we want our government to do, and I think that touches a little bit on what you're talking about. It is, so if we understand and identify and can agree on whatever the right term is, what the basic purpose is, how do we want to grow it from there? What are our expectations from there? Is access to the pool correct? And if so, how many pools do we need to have that access? Because some of those social and community recreation needs, I used to work for Lane County Parks. Recreation is a huge thing for me. So I'm all support for recreation. But then the other side of that, it gets down to the equability, being equitable in the dispersion of parks throughout a community. If you take, similar to what Texas has done, I think it was Houston, with how many ballot boxes they've got, and that restriction of ballot boxes. So those folks that are in certain communities now have to travel that much farther to be able to drop off their ballots and to go vote. So what does that look like in that dispersion throughout the community? And I think that goes to what are our expectations of the government in terms of those actual specific services, and what do we require them to do, and how do we require them to fulfill that? But again, getting back to the government responsibility versus personal accountability for some of that. Are there any other thoughts on where that line is between those two things? What do we want our government to be responsible for? Because somebody, I think David mentioned something about folks that have worked in local government, which is where I spent my career. That as soon as local government does something, now you're responsible for it. And sometimes it's easier not to do anything, because then you don't take on all that burden of having to manage it, monitor it, risk the liability, everything. So sometimes it's easier to say, yeah, no. And that's where a nonprofit world comes in. You know, they pick up a lot and do a lot, which is, you know, be too expensive, too cumbersome, too burdensome on the government to do. They backfill a lot of the services that the government could be providing, but nonprofits can do it in a so much better way. Particularly, you know, as soon as you get to procurement and contracting, you know, nonprofits, if you got one ED that can make sign a contract, much easier than having to go to a board, writing a board packet, and you know, everything that folks that have worked in local city government know. You got a board packet, you got a lot of things to read, a lot of things to approve. The executive director of a nonprofit can probably do things a lot faster than that, not have all those public liability concerns. So any other thoughts on obligations versus accountability and people being responsible for their own actions?
I'll throw something out there. I'm in a book club that we're doing After Virtue. I don't recommend it. It's incredibly hard to read. Very hard to read. We're doing a chapter a week, like 15 pages, and it's not easy. But his McIntyre's whole thing is basically critiquing every definition or use of virtue society has had for, well, ever, going back to Aristotle and then before Aristotle, and then coming to now, or the 80s when he wrote it. And so it gets into the obligations. What should you do? What do you have to do? What will government make you do? That's I'm butchering this, but very loosely. And something that's come up as we get off track, as we frequently do, is how things have changed. There used to be, and I may be going back 50 years, well before I was even born, but community groups that were just took the responsibility to do certain things. Whether it be organizing events that, quite frankly, you know, they weren't necessary to daily life, but they made it better. So I'm not saying even important stuff most of the time. You know, to showing up at school to, you know, contribute to the local neighborhood school, you know, for some specific need, which now everything's contracted out. It's government pays for it, tax dollars go for it. And, you know, is that better, worse? Maybe a little of both. And then you just brought up the last point, how the government, sometimes it doesn't need to do anything, because once it takes on a responsibility, then it has to do that forever, more or less. And also, once it takes on a responsibility, it effectively kills whoever was doing it before, if it was being done before. And I'm not so sure that's happened, but what is it? Robert Putnam, you know, his famous book from the mid 90s, late 90s, something like that. You know, people became less civically engaged. And this gets into the association life I think Victoria referenced earlier, where people would do things outside of government. And then once it goes to the government, nobody else thinks they have to contribute to it. It's like there's a lot of things government just doesn't do, because when people were doing it before the government, it's because they cared. When the government hires somebody, they don't necessarily care, and it shows in a way. And so I don't really have an answer. I know that was a long ramble, but I feel like there's something there that it's the government can take on too much and then do what it needs. And then the few things it actually has to do that nobody else can do gets worse. Which would be like police. And and I'm not trying to have a strict libertarian definition. I'll even throw in education, because quite frankly, there's no private school system that has taken on the public schools or gotten close. So until that happens, public schools are a thing. Somebody wants to beat them, that's great, but nobody's come close. But it's like you got to pick a few. And also, you guys were mentioning candidates earlier, candidate recruitment. So I want to wrap this into it. The thing people don't understand with recruiting candidates, I was involved 20 years ago, and I know you're doing it now, and I am definitely not doing it now to be absolutely clear. But it's like, it's not that you can't find somebody competent and qualified, but they also have to want to do it. And a lot of people don't want to do it that would be really good at it. So that's what makes it, that's, well, not what makes it, but a big thing in making it hard. But it's that want to that affects candidate recruitment, also affects the same jobs that the city government or county government has to hire for, to do the things the people expect it to do. And then when the people expect it to do too much and you spread those people out thin, because some people like and want to work for the government. Some people, maybe a lot of people, do not. And there's only so many good people who will care to go around. If that made any sense whatsoever.
It did. And, the interesting thing, and that I've been writing about recently, it is the fact that parties recruit people to win, not people to do the job. They're not necessarily separate. You can certainly find somebody that can actually win a race and do the job, but parties want people that can win the race. They'll worry about the job later on, and particularly if all they are is just a party lackey, it's easy. And when I was a Republican, minority party in Oregon, if I wanted to stay in office and actually just stay in office because I just wanted reelection after reelection, all I had to do was vote the way the minority party leader voted. I would have been just fine. I wouldn't have gotten primaried and lost. It's those folks that actually want to make change and do things. And Chanel's in this boat as well, that when you buck the party is when you have issues. And that's one of the key things that is different, particularly with what parties want to do. So Chanel, do you have any thoughts on any of that?
I have all kinds of thoughts stirring around in my head, but so Trey, I agree. Somebody has to want to do it, and that's why you have to recruit people, because you have to find those people, right, who are willing to work at it and willing to put their best foot forward and learn the process and I don't know, invest themselves into their communities. And there's lots of ways people can invest themselves into the community, whether it's like Victoria was saying, those associational things, because frankly, those are lacking in a lot of our communities now also. But our churches, our rotaries, our Kiwanis, all of those things. And I would say that, going back to our original question of what is the purpose of government, I would include education in there, because if I just think education is that common factor. And if you don't provide some sort of common education for your citizenry, for the kids, then you create huge problems. And pretty early on in our country, we decided that that was important, that having public schools were important to our democracy. And I know not everybody thinks that. I happen to be pretty passionate about it, and probably more so now than ever, because in Idaho, we're watching efforts to do away with that. And that's a huge concern to me when I watch people that, and it is in our constitution in Idaho that the government, provides a free common school for people. But anyway, watching this effort here for people to try to do away with that, I don't know. So that's probably at the top of my mind. And I think we all come to this table with different things in mind based on our life experience, right? So, like Leslie has worked with health and welfare, health and human services, so she's keyed into that. I'm very passionate about education. Everybody has their experiences that kind of guide where they go with this question of what the I don't know what the government is there for. But I don't know, I'm probably rambling too, but I have all kinds of thoughts about this. but it's very interesting to listen to people. And I don't want to put Sherry and Rick on the spot, but I'm going to, because with both of them being on city councils, I would be super curious. And they haven't really said much, but I would be very curious to hear what some of their thoughts are, because I think we often see like you see the federal government dictating to the state government. You certainly see the state government dictating to the more local governments. So I would love for them to weigh in on some of these conversations and comments. But
Ladies first, Sherry.
Oh, okay. Huh. Well, I don't know if I'm going in the right direction with this, but government, when I think of the city government, what are we responsible for? We're responsible for your roadways, for your city and your sewer, or city water, your sewer, making sure we have a safe city with safe and healthy. So healthy can go all different directions, but I can see different areas where every city, our city included, probably overreaches what I think a city should be responsible for. But I'm happy that they're doing other things like a Parks and Rec department. Is government really responsible for a Parks and Rec department? So that's kind of that, how far do you go with it? I don't know.
I think Sherry's right. Although I see different forms of local government, it was on a water tour in Boise last week, and they don't have a water department. It's all managed by private government. They do have sewer, and I think that's a health issue. And to me, government is about providing services as a group that we can't do individually, like fire, like security with the police department, providing roadways and rules of the road if we're going to live in large communities. It's about those kinds of services that I can't provide myself. But if I'm going to live in a community, I have an expectation of those services being provided. And I think beyond the very basic services, and you mentioned parks and recreation, those sorts of things, yeah, I don't think those ought to be provided free of government. There ought to be some skin in the game by those participants so they understand the cost of those programs and why you have to assess fees and taxes to pay for those services. And I think that's where a lot of government goes wrong today. I was at a senior center for lunch today, and there's an expectation there that every senior in our community deserves a free lunch every day. And that's not what it's all about. There is an expectation that the seniors provide something, but the city gives them $35,000 a year, and the county gives them some money, and the city of Chubbuck gives them some money, and they get money through this Southeast Idaho Community Action Agency. And yet there is still an expectation among a lot of those folks that that ought to be a free service provided by government to feed them. And I have to disagree with that. It's I guess it depends on your community, whether you're a town of 100 people or a community of 250,000 in Idaho. The city services are very different, and the expectations of the people that live there are very different. End
Yeah,
of sermon.
spot on. End of sermon. Spot on. Yeah, I'm glad we can provide these services, but I think when it comes down to it, it's not it shouldn't be a requirement. There should be very little government interference.
So great conversation. There's Trey's put some things in the chat. So has David. One of the things, Rick, to your point about providing services that we can't provide individually, the other part that I've heard is that we can't do individually, and that corporations can't profitize, right? So if private industry cannot make a profit off of it, it's going to fall back into the government side. And so I think the whole conversation between government and private industry, particularly at this point in time, with mergers and acquisitions and everything going on, Leslie, you're familiar with the healthcare issues that we have here in Oregon, just like I am with all the mergers and acquisitions, that, there's some significant concerns with the way that the private industry, in my opinion, is being regulated and the impact that they're having on providing basic services for folks, particularly in rural communities. One of the other things, I think it's similar to one of the points that you made, Rick, and to a certain extent, I want to get into what Chanel talked about with education. But one of the bills that we had in Oregon, and I don't know, Leslie, if you follow this on the healthcare side of things or not, but we had a bill that changed physician assistant to physician associate. Physician assistant to physician associate. Is that the responsibility of government to title and to change the titles for professions? So clearly we've got medical boards, we've got all kinds of organizations to ensure the safe medical practice, all the things that I think the government should provide some sort of security and certainty for folks when you go see a doctor, that that they've at least met some standards. But is that the responsibility? Should we have a bill that goes through and changes one word and all the associated costs, to get it through the legislature to have all the votes on it, but then also the back end to change all the Oregon revised statutes and everything, where you've got to go. I think it's more complicated than just to search and find and replace in Word to do that. So again, how in depth again, and I bring that up because Chanel talking about education, and with the Parks and Recs, at what point in time for government is it the responsibility, and is it a natural right for people to have an education or the opportunity for an education and to have a right for health and safety? Or again, is that something that the government has to proactively do, or just not inhibit your ability to do it if you wanted to do it? And where is that line between requiring kids to go to school and offering them an opportunity to go to the school if they should do it? Because again, we've got homeschool, we've got all kinds of different education models that people can go through. So
isn't the question with that though, who pays for that? I mean, should the
yeah,
government pay to send your kid to private school? Or is that your responsibility? The government provides a free public education, and if you choose to do something else, I mean, I personally don't think that the government should need to fund that, but not everybody agrees with me. But anyway, it's a thought, because it's not just that the government provides education, that's the only option, right? We have, like you said, there's so many different options. Most states have all kinds of options, but then the question becomes who should pay for that.
And I go to, again, we'll stick with the health side because I know a little bit about it, particularly in rural areas. Does that same logic for education, having, the value of having an educated public hopefully for the purpose of propagating democracy, as opposed to going into an autocracy or, despot or whatever else we want to go into, what other government model there is, does that apply to healthcare? And so at what limit? So my seniors that live out 45 minutes from the nearest ER, is it the government's responsibility to pick up the tab for that taxi? Where does that line draw? If it's somebody's individual choice to live out in a rural area, what is the government's responsibility to get them into a hospital, given that all of our rural clinics are either nonprofits or they're closing because of mergers and acquisitions? Oregon loses 40 independent pharmacies a year just because of the pharmacy reimbursement rates and pharmacy benefit managers and everything going on in that healthcare sector. We lose 40. So all of our rural citizens are having difficulty. But if we want an educated citizenry, should we also have a healthy citizenry? And at what level do we do that? How much do we reimburse those taxi cab rides for somebody that needs to get in there? And do we do it only for emergency circumstances? Or do you also do it for the preventative care so you don't have the exorbitant emergency situations that the preventative healthcare could have had and could have, at that much lower cost? And David, you're an economist. So just, you have the social, the moral, the humanity arguments, but then you just have the economic side of that as well. What is economically more beneficial to all the other taxpayers where their money is going. And where is that line drawn? Getting back to the vocal folks are going to demand something. And if it's a humanity argument, used to be that you would lose that. How are you going to say, yeah, no, we don't care for our citizens, we're not going to pay for that money? Where does that look like?
I
Well,
think this is.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Leslie. Well, I was just say that like that decision is literally what defines government, because the citizens have to make the choice. How much are they going to pay in taxes to get what services? And it's like I was talking about in Texas with education. They build those 60, 70, I think $80 million stadiums. Maybe they're 20 million. I don't know. They're expensive. We'll leave it at that. Football stadiums. But of course, I've been told they throw in the arts and they do a bunch of other stuff too. But I don't think anywhere else in the country does it on that level as close to Texas. Because if anywhere else did, the stadium would sit empty. It's just like it would serve no purpose. But you mentioned hospitals or rural clinics closing. I know in Alabama, or the county where I live, we have tax dollars that goes to the hospital. I think tax dollars keeps it open. And there's a big to do a few years back about what was it, building not even a city rec with the softball, baseball, all those fields, and basketball, tennis, you name it. But it was building a field or fields that could host travel ball tournaments, which travel ball, if you're involved in anything with youth sports, has taken over and killed the rec leagues for the more or less, or best case has just hurt them a lot. And that took money from the hospital. And so the hospital, it was possible. It still may be possible. It has to close. It has to close. Everybody has to drive further. But when it comes down to it, isn't that the definition of government, to decide what to do? And then if you don't like it, you move.
That gets into the economic argument of you have to have the ability to move, and not everybody can. Or whether it's financial, whether it's job, whether it's family, there are a lot of reasons why people are unable to move or unwilling. And I think part of that's why some people run for office, because they want to make changes with where they actually live, because they want to keep living there. They just don't like the way that it's being governed.
Well, and you're talking about an issue that varies from county to county and state to state. In Idaho, health services, ambulance districts are primarily a county function. And in rural Bannock County, where I live, if you have a heart attack, you're going to die, because it takes us an hour to get an ambulance to you. And we've got several thousand people who choose to live there, but they are not getting equal health care. And they're paying the same amount of money as everybody else in the county for that service, but it's not being delivered. And I think there's a problem there, and it's a big one in Idaho we're trying to solve right now.
Rick, you just illustrated access and opportunity in a life or death situation, and equitably making that happen. Really, really a good example that can be aligned. I think government also has a role in innovation, like federally qualified health clinics were a solution to the lack of access to healthcare in rural communities, with both accepting government programs like Medicaid and Medicare, and sliding scale fees for fee-based payers, so that the dynamic of the community could help support that qualified health center in a lot of different ways. And it is there and available for, as you mentioned, prevention.
So where do you see that, Leslie, at the federal level? So as we roll down from the federal level, and how important it is on the Medicaid side to get those federal dollars and to leverage the state funds to get that, particularly if you're Medicare plus, Medicaid plus. how does, it should the folks in Alabama ostensibly, even though you can't track a single dollar through the system, should they be paying for healthcare in Oregon because Oregon is very broad and Oregon goes out and they try to tap into as much Medicaid dollars as they can. We have Medicaid, we got exemptions, we got Medicaid dollars that go to help housing. Is that the role of government? Is to help folks through Medicaid funds to get stable housing under the auspices of healthcare? Because one of the things that I talk about, and I don't have an easy answer, but we're all biological organisms. Everything we do impacts our health. So is the role of the Oregon Health Authority to govern every single aspect of my life because I'm a biological organism? And those folks that don't have the resources that I have, they're going to need more help. Is that the role of Oregon Health Authority to get into every aspect of somebody's life? Should they sell shoes? Should Oregon Health Authority start selling coats in the wintertime? At what point in time do we draw that line and say, yeah, no, it's not the role of government. There are some other ways and more efficient ways we could do that. So I'm just curious, Leslie, anything that you've got on that, and anybody else wants to talk about healthcare? I can talk about healthcare for a long time because it's always my district is.
I think I think again it goes back to the evaluation piece. If you can prove that the actions of government that you are implementing reduce costs, if you can put the facts out there around that, I think in the initial stages of Oregon's healthcare experiment, there's a high level of clarity, about Kitzhaber's argument when he first wanted to do something different, is that instead of somebody trying to get in an ambulance and either die or make it there on time, if they're in the heat, maybe an air conditioner is the right solution for somebody who has congestive heart failure. So I think that the accountability piece of government, if you want people to believe that government has a role, we have to arm people with the facts around innovation. It can't be just like a decision. I think it's government's role. I don't believe that that's a good argument, but I do believe that if you can show that innovation leads to cost savings, I think you're in a better place. And I think you're in a better place to engage the public in saying, yeah, this makes sense, if you can use plain language to explain it. Maybe which the Oregon Health Authority doesn't do.
I've got a lot. I won't use this as a session on the Oregon Health Authority, which is my bugaboo agency. They do a lot of good work, but I think they could do better stuff. And you're right. It is air conditioning. And in Oak Ridge, which is a higher level, older community, old timber town, they put air filters because it's fire season for all of us out west. And they put a note: is that the right job for government to purchase air filters through the Medicaid program to ensure that people can breathe that live in a rural community that is prone to every year they're going to have wildfires? And also they're also in an inversion zone, so in the wintertime when everybody's burning their fireplaces, the city's filled with smoke as well. Again, so those are the practical things, and why I wanted to have this conversation about what is the basic purpose. How far do we need to go as a basic purpose for government versus what is a choice? Because that economic conversation is always, it saves money, but it saves money in areas that should we be spending money to begin with. And that was always one of the questions I have tried to think about for Medicaid, trying to leverage federal dollars. If Oregon's going to put in 40% of housing to get 60% from the feds for just for easy math for housing, should we even be spending that 40%, or can we get better bang for the buck by taking that 40% and doing something else? Because is that always the best point to leverage money? And that was always the question that I had. Prove to me that this is the best use of that 40%, because Oregon, like most states, now that the grants are drying up from the federals, we're all hurting. Our local governments are going to be hurting. We're going to have to really get down to what do we actually need to do? How do we best accomplish that? And I know I talk a lot, but I want to touch base real quick because Rob's put in a couple things. And one of the things, and Chanel, I don't know if you saw this, but curious on it with where we're at with the conversation. And with Florida's recent decision about vaccination in schools, it, where does that fit in the rubric of, yes, we provide education, but what are the circumstances and what are the environments, what are the actual rights that the other students and other parents have to ensure that there's not going to be an outbreak and that kids can still continue to go and not have worry about the measles or any of the other things going through. So just curious on your thoughts.
I was just going to ask if we could go back to Robert's comment.
It's an interesting situation. How that, and David asked earlier, is government a process or an outcome? For me, it's largely a process of balancing the public interest with the private interest. And in the case of vaccinations, obviously Florida is drawing a line that seems to favor the sanctity of the private interests, personal interests, individual interests over the public interest, whereas the Pacific Coast states are arguing just the opposite, refuse to go there and are going to develop their own standards for vaccinations, largely, I suspect, favoring the public interest.
Go ahead, Chanel.
Well, I don't have an answer to it, but it is interesting to watch because, I mean, I think in most states right now, they have required vaccinations for kids to enter public school, but you can get an exception, right? And so there has been traditionally this kind of mixture of it's required, but I don't know. It makes me nervous that we're going down this road. I'll just say that. Makes me very nervous that we're going down this road of we're not going to say anything to anybody, and I don't know. We're starting to see measles outbreaks in Idaho, and we have a very low vaccination rate in the state of Idaho compared to other states. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what the answer is, and I don't know what's going to be the result of these different decisions. But
in a way, that speaks to David's question: is government a process or an outcome? It may be a process of drawing lines and balancing rights, but what is the outcome that's going to be determinative in this particular case around vaccinations that will tell us whether Florida has good government or the West Coast has good government? I mean, how do you resolve that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's hard. I feel like everything we've talked about, there just aren't easy answers to any of it, which is partially why I was so excited about this particular conversation, because it's just interesting to think about, and there aren't easy answers to these questions. But
I'm kind of wondering if the reason why there aren't easy answers is because the things that are easy to answer, like, how much should the hammer at the hardware store cost, or, those types of things are very adaptive to the private sector. It's like there aren't moral questions about so many, batteries or, all the different household things that we consume all the time. And anything that doesn't have a high moral threshold or a long-term outcome implication falls easily into a private sector transaction. It's a trade, it's done, you move on, you do it over and over and over and again. And so then once the trades get to be more subjective to people's moral standards, they become harder to resolve in that way. And so they get pushed to a government type of transaction. And then in the analysis of those, I think it's important to both talk about the dollars and cents of them, but not forget that they're there because there are all these other implications. For instance, if you close parks off to people, in Minnesota, everybody loves the lakes, and you only let private ownership of all the lakeshore in the state to private people, you're just going to have a class problem. I mean, so the implications of some of these joint ownership issues with national park systems and so forth are because of very long-term, social structures that we want to be equitable, in theory anyway. So I just sort of entertain that, things are pushed to the private sector because there aren't a lot of moral issues, and those that go to the public are because there are. And so we depend on all you that are in, government service to sort those out for us.
Thanks, Les or Victoria. And we in government depend on you to vote for us so we can actually keep doing that. It's a synergistic relationship. You can't do the work unless you have people voting for you and supporting you. Thank you for bringing up the hammer, because the question that I've got, and getting back to the healthcare side of things, a hammer, you got the simple economic model, you got, the price and the demand and supply, you got the curves, and David, you can go in depth with that if you want to, if I misstate anything. But what is the government's responsibility to act as an agent for the people in the healthcare sector if the private sector is overcharging or charging X amount, and all hospitals charge different rates, different things? What is the role of the government to act as an agent on the people to ensure that those prices are capped? And what does that look like? Because, as you get into those moral obligations, and we get into this because I think, the end result of this conversation is complex, and there is no one right answer. What does the tool sector look like at Home Depot versus the healthcare sector, and the role of the government to ensure that people can afford the hammers, but also that people can actually afford the healthcare that they need, not go broke doing either one of them.
Well, and I think we're missing the fact that the private sector is intertwined in this argument. So if we go back to the vaccination piece, insurance premiums, smoker, non-smoker, pay more, pay less. My crystal ball tells me that if Florida goes out on this adventure of no vaccines are required, there's going to be a vaccinated rate for insurance coverage and an unvaccinated rate, because an unvaccinated person is more likely to be in an ER if they're exposed to one of these communicable diseases, and therefore are going to have exuberant claims. So a lot of times the private industry is the controller of how far a government can go in, if you want to use the expression, freeing people from the tyranny of vaccines, if that's what you happen to believe. Yeah, for now. But I have a feeling that it's not just going to be that black and white.
So
Well,
the
I
insurance
also
company.
think oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Chanel.
Well, I was just thinking that, in addition, we have grown up in a society where vaccinations have worked, and we're used to not having these diseases around. And so now people are just thinking that they don't need to be vaccinated, not understanding that they have had that luxury of not getting these diseases, not having children die because we don't have these issues, these diseases in our country. Whereas I think if you ask people in other countries who haven't had that luxury, they probably would have a very different approach to some of these vaccination discussions than what we're seeing right now. I mean, there's no reason for people in the United States to get measles. And contrary to popular belief, you can die from measles. It's not just the simple, I don't know. It's just really interesting. And I thought David's comment uh in the chat that does vaccination work have a pretty easy answer. I think that does have an easy answer, but now that's getting thrown on its head too. Because it's been politicized, I would say, is actually the reason why. But I don't know. Maybe that's off target.
Now, I mean, the politics of this means that overlay with human nature and our soul. Again, getting back to that's our social side of things, that's our hierarchy side of it, that's our passion side of things, it's our fallibility side of things. So that's all of the traits that get wrapped up in the parties and the party politics. But one of the things interesting that you just brought up, Chanel, that I want to mention is the book, The Fourth Turning is Here. When they talk about the turnings, the changes, are in cycles of 80 to 100 years. When something new happens, right? When we come out of this crisis, the first generation born, and generations being 20, 25 years, they're the founding generations, right? They make changes because they lived through the crisis. Then their kids grew up in that household, so they're going to keep going with the effort that their parents did. But it's those grandkids, and that's what I think you're getting at, that didn't live through either one of those experiences, that lose touch with what that is. And I think that's where we're at. I mean, so if we're at the grandkid stage, because vaccinations, go back to polio, when was that, the early 1900s, we're 100 years after that. We're getting to the grandkids and the great grandkids stage from that generation. They have lost touch with what it was like to have to live through the polio scare and all those other diseases before we got the vaccination. So it's really interesting that you're bringing that up as I'm reading through that book. And the other thing is, Leslie, you brought up insurance companies, and particularly, I think some ways they could be that check on what the public sector does because of the impact in the private sector. But when we talk about wildfire funding, particularly California, so many insurance companies are pulling out because they can't make a profit. And Oregon has some of that issue as well. And I don't remember exactly where you live and if you're in a fire-prone area, but we've had the conversations about insurance rates for homeowners. So insurance companies are profit motivated, and that can check government, but it can also be a detriment. And if they leave that void, then is the government supposed to fill that gap and provide that health insurance through Medicaid or Medicare, depending on the age and what is going on? Are they going to have to be able to provide and to backfill that? Because then the government can't charge a vaccination and an unvaccinated Medicaid rate, I don't think. So I'm just curious on any thoughts with that and the role of those insurance companies, what they can and can't do with, because that private sector is certainly there, but it's the government control of that private sector as well, what they mandated to do. And, Obama was able to do some things with Affordable Care Act to interest them and to get them to pay it, but some of that subsidizing it. And again, is that the proper role of government to subsidize part of that healthcare? If you choose not to vaccinate your kid, they get measles. Are you SOL, or now do you get the government to pay for it?
I think what happens when the private sector isn't able to accommodate the need for, say, insurance, like flood insurance is the same, right? You have flooding, the houses are in a flood zone, the houses get destroyed, and then the federal government comes in with relief, for instance. And I think what triggers the mechanism at that point is a re-discussion of, is that really where we want to spend our money? And so it's sort of that natural process of throwing it back out to the politicians to debate it and discuss it and come up with, do we keep letting people rebuild in a flood zone when we know the river is going to flood again in 25 years, for instance? And so there isn't one answer. It's just a matter of it being rediscussed. And are we wealthy enough to afford this now? Should we give relief to those folks, or does the private sector say no and they just have to build their home elsewhere?
And the other part, maybe, Victoria, to some of that, it is who is paid to suffer. So if it's a child that parent doesn't get the vaccination for, they're going to be suffering the healthcare. What is the government's responsibility to ensure the child is cared for, versus is there a different obligation or some sort of penalty or anything to the parents that made that decision? And I bring that up because, listening to you, one of the things with the flood zone is for purely optional recreational activity. So folks that want to go climb a mountain in the middle of winter and get lost, what is the government's responsibility to provide search and rescue that can go get them off that mountain? And how much do they have to pay to do that? Or is that just a service the government provides, is if you want to climb the mountain in the wintertime and get lost in a blizzard, we're going to come rescue you because of your choice that you made that was purely optional. So you get, who is going to suffer? What was their choice in that? And were they forced into it? Or was it something that was completely discretionary?
Is that not an issue in Oregon? And in that, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, name the Western states, but I thought it was not necessarily government, but very much local government that did the high risk rescue, I guess I'll call it. Um, and also it was generally people from out of town. So you're paying your government, your tax dollars are going to rescue out of towners that aren't paying the tax dollars. And it's not like it's normal police budgeting. It's, pretty expensive. Is that not an issue in Oregon?
Search and rescue never has. I mean, they usually get the money, and they're usually associated with the county sheriff's department. And Mount Hood and Portland is usually where a lot of people go hiking and they get rescued. But same thing over in Bend and the Sisters area and some of those mountainous areas. So depending on how close, sometimes there could be counties, multiple counties from a distance that go, and depending on some of the equipment. I mean, if you're in one of the counties that has a snowcat, yeah, you're probably going to likely travel out of county to go get somebody, depending on what's available, what resources are there. And particularly with helicopters and everything else that goes into that. Urban search and rescue is a newer thing, and those are usually going through fire departments, not necessarily the sheriff's office. So Chanel, as to pay search and rescue, Sherry, do you have an answer for that in Idaho?
We just have this huge canyon that runs through Twin Falls, and it's so there's a big bridge that crosses the canyon, and it's the only bridge in the United States that does not require a permit to base jump. And every year people die down there base jumping. They hit the wall of the canyon, or their parachute doesn't, open. And anyway, so yeah, when you were talking about search and rescue, I'm like, oh, I wonder who's paying for that.
There have been some cases in Oregon where people have been, where they've had to pony up and get that, but it's not all the time. I think some of it depends on, the stupidity of the people actually doing the activities. Whether they actually end up having to pay something.
Sometimes they do get a
Go ahead,
bill.
Leslie.
It depends on where you are, but sometimes those rescue, it's billable, like an ambulance service would be for a wealthy person, and their insurance covers it. And there's no insurance for stupidity, but so they have a bill that they would have to pay. And this is something where socialist countries, I think, have it right. If I have a libertarian hat, it's this. And that is like when you go to their national parks or their municipal outdoor areas, you're on your own. And if you make a decision to do something foolish, you can't sue them. You can't sue them if you trip on a rock, or if you're doing a balance beam on a narrow ridge, or base jumping off a canyon, for not telling them that it was dangerous. I really wish that our government would lean more into in the responsibility area, into that realm in terms of use of public lands. I mean, I'm just happy to have them available to me. But I would hate to see the expense of rescuing people for doing stupid acts get in the way of having those things get blocked off. Then everybody else can't use it.
This also,
Well,
sorry.
nope, go ahead.
It brings into view the role of the private sector also. So if you get lost on Mount Bachelor, I had a friend who was on the search and rescue team there. I think it's Mount Bachelor, it's private property, who supported that team. And if you're in the public wilderness, the Sisters area, and you're lost, what responsibility does the government have? I agree with you, Leslie, that we should tell people, disclose to people at the trailhead that no, there is no search and rescue provided should you become lost. However, if there is a local private enterprise that is willing and equipped to go help people who become who become lost, here's the phone number. You can call them and they'll tell you what their rates are. Really to make it crystal clear as to what the expectation should be around this.
I want to bring up, you talked about disclosure. At some point we brought up, I think it was in Houston, like ballot box access being reduced. So you got to go a little further. I had a conversation with a few folks a month or so ago about the ballot box issue today, not even 10 or 20 years ago. But if you want to vote today, there are more organizations that with more money than they know what to do with, especially for presidential elections. Now, if it's a local municipal election, okay, that's probably a little different. That will come pick you up, probably give you something to drink and eat if they think you're going to vote for their person, and take you to the polls. Now, is that necessarily the best thing ever? Maybe not, but it's like you can vote. But the issue is, or the point is, information is easily accessible. And you just brought up, like having a certain information at the trailhead so it's disclosed to them. But that's the thing now is like, whereas just 20, even 10 years ago, yeah, you needed signs, you disclosure and everything. But even today with like Chat GTP as good as it's getting, every few months, it's so easy to pull it up. It's like makes Google look like, something from the 1950s, archaic, as far as the quality of it. So the point I'm getting to is the government, like the role of government and the standard to which government has always, always, I don't know, in the last 30, 40, 50 years, had to hold itself um, to go out of its way to make sure everybody was, I don't know, but not necessarily included. That's not the point I'm trying to make, but had access to information. Um, any, maybe any day now, but in the next decade for sure, that standard is going to be totally changed. Um, it's not, it's, it does, the sign posted, everybody has a phone. My goodness, the homeless in DC had Blackberries. Granted, Blackberries haven't existed in a long time, but this 15 years ago, I think it was, when Blackberries were on the way down, they gave the homeless Blackberries, because it just made sense to give them the services and it was cheaper. But my point is, it's like everybody today, almost, we're somewhere in the 90th percentile, has the devices to get the information. And it's, how is that changing the role of government in, just immediately? Something government, all the processes governments used for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, are being made, if not inefficient, that's not the right word, but it's like, are being put should be questioned at the least. And a quick aside to all that, if we're going to have anything, I would love when it comes to personal responsibility, the lawsuits. And I think this may have been in the 80s and 90s when it got real bad, suing for, you slip, where it says, wet floor and you slip and you sue and win. And it's like, it's the frivolous lawsuits that went out of control way back when and never really were fixed. I mean, they may not have gone more insane, but I don't know that they ever got better. Anyway, that's my end of my rant.
Appreciate that, Trey. And I think we're past the 4 o'clock, so I want to wrap this up. I really, this time's gone by fast. Really enjoyed the conversation. I found it pretty meaty and a lot of different points to think through, and just that complexity. And coming back to what Trey, it's government responsibility versus personal accountability, and where do we draw that line? And is it different from one sector to a different sector? And is it different from, somebody that we need to take care of, whether it's youth or whether it's somebody with mental health issues, somebody with some physical disabilities and accessibility, versus somebody that doesn't have those and has a little bit more discretion in their ability to act and to move, to do things themselves. So, there was a lot there. And I'll tell you, I really appreciate the conversation. Our next one, Chanel and I will figure out when it'll be, probably about 3 weeks or so, but it'll be probably our last one in this series, and happy to have more people interested and or change the topics to get into this, some of this a little bit different. But it's now, what do we expect our government to do? Where are we going to go given everything, the foundation that we've built? Where are we going to go from here, and have that conversation? So I just want to open up any last very brief comments, because we're 5 past 4 o'clock. But any last brief comments? If not, thank you all very much. I really have enjoyed it, and I appreciate the involvement in the conversation.
So did I. Thank you all.